Hello, I'm Valora Washington, CEO of the CAYL Institute, that's Community Advocates for Young Learners, and we are so delighted to have you once again join the CAYL Catalyst webinar. This is our 60th episode, and we're really grateful to all of you that you continue to tune in. As you know, the CAYL webinar series features timely and bold conversations to help your personal and professional growth. And you can find us on the first Thursday of every month at 4 o'clock Eastern Time. This year's theme is Reflect for Insight and Reset for Action. And what we're doing this year is we're highlighting leaders who have shaped our field so that we're so happy that you joined the CAYL webinar series of this, our 60th anniversary, our 60th episode. And we hope today that we're going to have a wonderful conversation with Ellen Galinsky. She's a leader in our field who, for me, inspires a lot of respect and awe because she has given the field so many impressive and extraordinary gifts in the research and practice of working with young children and families. So just a few notes. All of our webinars are free. They're all recorded. They're all available on our website and our YouTube channel so that everyone can hear them regardless of your location or scheduled. But if you've joined us live today, we encourage you to write in the chat, tell us who you are and where you're from. And everyone who registered for this webinar is going to receive next week an email with resources that will help you dig deeper into today's conversation. And for those of you who joined us live, remember, you're invited to the after party. That means that near the end of this webinar, we're going to put a link in the chat and you can join a live question and answer conversation with Ellen Galinsky. So do stay involved with the CAYL Institute by joining us on social media, visiting our website, and viewing our YouTube channel. And once again, thanks to all of you, so many thousands of you who tune in to the CAYL Catalyst webinar series each month. We're very grateful for you, and we hope that you will pay it forward by making a tax-deductible gift to the CAYL Institute in any amount. You can do this by texting CAYL to 53555. So as we get ready to hear from Ellen today, we're encouraging you to ask questions of her and to share your thoughts in the chat. And to start off, here's something you might consider. Ellen's often say that we need to keep the fire of children's eyes burning brightly. What do you think we've been doing well to keep those fires burning brightly? And where do you think we're missing the mark, maybe inadvertently extinguishing those fires? Love to hear what you think. So while you're writing, I'm going to ask Ellen to join me on camera. And really so happy to welcome you, Ellen, to the CAYL Catalyst webinar series. And your research, Ellen, has been so compelling, so influential in multiple fields of study. And it's been really interesting to watch you over the past few decades that I've known you because your career has transitioned so nicely, so effortlessly from early childhood to then helping us think about workforce issues and how young children are interacting with that, and to now to adolescence. So it's been really a joy to watch you do this. And your latest book, The Breakthrough Years, is really reshaping how people are thinking about adolescence. Even as we go back to look at your earlier work, Mind in the Making, which really told us 7 essential life skills based on neuroscience. So you've described your fabulous career as a research adventure. And so I want to personally thank you for the adventure that you've been taking because I've learned so much from you and you've given so much light and so much insight to the field as a whole. And I know our audience would just love to hear more about the adventure that you've been taking in your career. And so what would you like to share with our listeners today?
Well, thank you so much, Valora. It's such a thrill to be with you. As I told you when we were emailing earlier, I feel very awed and humbled by having this opportunity to have a conversation with you. Laura and I first met on the board of NAEYC,
Mhm.
and so it has been a while that we've been following each other's adventures. Um, I knew that you were going to ask me to tell my story because I've listened to your other podcasts, and you often start out this way, and that made me think about what from my own childhood, since we all care about the childhood of children, early childhood, what about my own childhood um, led me to go from being a classroom teacher to being a researcher who keeps jumping fields. So I thought of two experiences that were really pivotal in who I am and who I continue to become. One is my mother. She just was a person who genuinely wondered all of the time. If we were eating cereal, she would look at the box of cereal and read the back of it and say, I wonder why the advertisers decided to try to sell Cheerios this way versus that way. We all then started to wonder about, well, how do advertisers influence us and why would they choose this message versus another message? And or if we were out driving and they were looked like there were a lot of dark cars on the road versus light cars, she'd say, I wonder why people are buying darker colored cars this year. And she just was that kind of person. And that is a path to wondering for I think all kids and for me. The second experience was in grade school, and one of a teacher whom I had, I think it was Mr. Bond, if I'm not mistaken, um, asked us to select our favorite author, and then he asked us to write that author a letter. And so I picked my favorite author. I read a lot. I grew up in West Virginia, and there wasn't a lot to do there. Very different from these days with no media. We had to make our own entertainment. And so I read a lot. I was very familiar with the library. I started a day and went through the books, A to Z. And I picked my favorite author and I wrote to her. And miracle, she wrote me back. She actually wrote me back. And that started a correspondence where she asked me, I suggested that she write a book about West Virginia. Knew that she had written a series about kids growing up in different parts of the country, and it was so seldom that people wrote about my home state. And she said she wanted to. So then I introduced her to Wilma Brown, who was the librarian in Charleston at the time. And, it took maybe 10, 15 years, but a book about West Virginia came out that I had helped instigate. That experience told me that it wasn't just in my hometown or in my family that I could make a difference, that I could actually try things that were a little scary and they might work out. So I think now I would call it a possibilities mindset, but I really saw that I could do things that maybe I might have thought I couldn't. So yes, research adventure. I think I've only had one question my whole life, which is what can we do to help kids grow and thrive? And that adventure has taken me as a teacher. When I was a teacher, I knew what we thought we were teaching children, but I didn't know what children thought we were teaching them. So this was preschool. I had the kids play school, Tools of the Mind sets up sociodramatic scenes for kids to both help them learn skills and to help them and to help the adults see what they know. And I asked the kids to play school. The way I was teaching, I was at Bank Street, was not a traditional all the kids sit in a desk and raise your hand kind of a teaching. It was much more experience based, hands on, um, that sort of exploratory kind of learning, what we would call developmentally appropriate now. And in fact, Barbara Biber was one of the key founders of Head Start and is responsible for the concept of developmentally appropriate. And she was at Bank Street at the time. Well, the kids in my class, despite learning in a very different way, all created very traditional schools. They had all the kids lined up. The teacher had them raise their hands. Where did they get that? I mean, they saw it on television, but was television more real than their experience? So that just led me on trying out all kinds of ideas as a teacher, which led me to get a grant when I was at Bank Street, where they thought that people who were teaching should be the people who communicated about education. It shouldn't just be people who hadn't been in a classroom for 40 years, who didn't have any sense of the reality of what it is to teach and learn. So I got the assignment of communicate about Bank Street's philosophy. And I said, what should I do? And they said, well, I don't know. We don't know. Figure it out. So I didn't, it took me a while to figure it out, but I ended up being able to realize that what I would do to help people understand about Bank Street's philosophy of teaching was to do film strips. It was before the days where we could have done videos, but to do film strips of how teachers made decisions. So how does a teacher know how to organize a room? Or how does a teacher use cooking as a way of learning? Or how does a teacher have a curriculum in mind and then something happens and the teacher shifts the curriculum? Those were some of the real life dilemmas that I did. And so for about 4 or 5 years, I made film strips interviewing teachers, which led me to actually writing books about education. At the time, there was an assumption that childcare was really evil for children. Newsweek magazine would have pictures of poor little, who's minding the children would be the title, and children looking bereft, looking out at the world, and it was called Stranger Danger and so forth. And I knew there had to be good childcare out there, so I got a grant again from the Ford Foundation with a colleague to go around the country and looked at exemplary childcare. And while I was doing that, that led me to the question of, well, all these parents whom I'm interviewing in these exemplary childcare programs felt that they were the only ones who were struggling to get their kids out in the morning. They were the only ones who had arsenic hour in the evening, which is when your kids freak out, and but you think everybody else's house they're having a cozy family dinner, but your kids are screaming, and they were wondering how to manage. There were actually no words for it. It was work and family life, but they were wondering how to manage it, and they didn't know how. And that led me to the question of, well, wait a minute, why? What if each person thinks it's an individual problem? It's a huge social problem. So, with a group of people, I found other people who were interested in that question, and with a group of people, we actually ended up creating the field of work and family life, which led me to leave Bank Street eventually and start the Families and Work Institute and to work with colleagues around the country to create this new field where we didn't even know what the variables were in the beginning, but ultimately now people think it's normal. I'm producing a film on the where we've gone back and interviewed some of the founders of the work-life field, and there wasn't even a name for what it is we were doing, work, family, work, life. There was no name for it. And I called it the taxi driver test. If taxi drivers, now you would say Uber drivers, knew what you were doing, then maybe you would, we'd come somewhere. So, then I started to wonder how parents grow and change. We were so focused on how kids grow and change. And, so I ended up doing a book, a study, and then a book about that became the 6 stages of parenthood. And when I was doing research on work and family life, I started to wonder, well, do kids feel the same way about their parents' work as parents feel? And I started to do interviews where I'd go into not only doing studies of the employees, again with colleagues, but asking their children. And I saw that it was as if kids were looking out of a picture window, seeing a very different reality from what the adults were seeing. And that just led to a ton of research on, including one I've just done now on kids and mental health with John Hopkins, on how kids see the world versus how we think kids see the world. So, work and family life led me to actually seeing that I was doing one of the Ask the Children studies where I wanted to look at youth and learning, and I found that kids were pretty dead on arrival when I asked them to talk about learning. They would tell me about when they didn't learn, but these are fifth through 12th graders. They couldn't tell me when they did, about learning. They were much more interested in talking about when learning failed. And I could see that the engagement on learning was really low. There were no national statistics at that point. And that led to the question of Valora that Valora asked you to answer in the chat, which is, well, wait a minute. Kids are born engaged in learning. At that time, my next door neighbors had adopted twins, and they had come from an orphanage in China. One was really quite sick when they came to live with her new adoptive parents. But they were still wanting to see, to touch, to taste, to experience everything. And then I was contrasting them with these kids who I was interviewing about learning, and they were like, no learning. And so, what are we doing to turn off that fire in children's eyes? So that led me, I didn't know that I was going to write a book called Mind in the Making. I just wanted to understand what are we doing as a society to turn off the fire for children's eyes, which led me to executive function skills. And that led to the book Mind in the Making and onward. Once I knew about executive function skills and how predictive they are, the best predictor we have of what helps children have good mental health and good academic health, I then needed to learn about adolescence. So I plunged into that. So it's been, yeah, one question, Valora, after another question after another. I just, like my mother, have never run out of questions.
I love how you started at such a young age with this idea of possibility mindset. And that actually that possibility mindset and the fact that you start asking questions at a very young age, and then you've just continued even to the present time, just asking question, and each question leads to another line of inquiry for you.
That's
I'm
right.
curious, this is a little bit off topic, but how do we do that? You are a reader. I know myself. I grew up climbing a tree, sitting in a tree, reading books all summer. That's what we did because, as you said, there were not a lot of other options that were going on. But now, as you know, there are many digital options. There are a lot of other things that take children's attention. How are we going to get them to ask all those questions? The kind of questions that when you're reading books, as we did growing up, you're putting yourself in another world. You're immersing yourself in situations for learning. How do we do that today with children?
Well, I think that's why I wanted to start with mother. I think uh, if you have adults asking questions, then we're going to have kids asking questions. So we have to be the change we want to see in the world. My daughter would put it that way, the Doug
Uh-huh.
Hammerstein quote. But the uh, I just was doing some training for the new Real Skills for Real Life curriculum that I've been spending the last 6 months developing and I'm piloting, and we're going to launch out into the world in the fall. And I was with a group of teachers from Savannah just less than an hour ago, and we were talking about how we talk to kids in the classroom. If we have a classroom where there's a teacher in the front and all the kids are lined up and the teacher asks a question and there's a quick yes or no answer, and some kids get it and some kids don't, and, they're always the ones who hold up their hand, then we're going to have people feeling like, well, there's a right and a wrong answer versus a
Mhm.
sense of exploration. We are born to explore. That is a survival skill. That's what learning is, exploring. So if the teachers say things like "I wonder" or "I notice," those two words, this is what we were saying in the group that I just was facilitating an hour ago. If we just change our vocabulary, and I remember visiting Jason Sachs's curriculum in your area, Boston, the focus curriculum, and took pictures of on the wall about how teachers were writing. What did you notice? Did you look? What did you hear? What did you see? And asking the kids to turn and talk to each other versus, so that everyone has a chance to participate. I think it's not hard to create an environment where people are learning, and I did it for teachers. When I headed the I started was a founder of the Family Center at Bank Street to have childcare for my own kids, to be honest. But then I ended up helping to run it for a number of years, and teacher turnover is such a problem. But I got each teacher to pick a question that she or he was really interested in and become the expert of that for our group. And then to go out and give speeches to other groups, because they really explored it. So they'd read about it, they'd talk to people. I knew who they could talk to. It didn't always have to be book reading because not everyone likes book reading. Now there are lots of ways to learn. I still make videos for people. Um, and um, and that led to much higher quality teaching, frankly, because people had an expertise that they could share, and it led to less turnover. And some of the people who were classroom teachers like me went on to do, other things in their lives where
Mhm.
they really contributed in lots of different ways. So it gives us a career path forward in early childhood that we might not have.
Well, you wrote mine in the banking, but I just want to say, isn't there such a bias for teaching kids facts and getting kids to memorize information?
Yes, and that's why I'm partnering with AASA, the school superintendent organization, because they realize that more of, that test, I mean, if you look at the sort of outward signs of success in children learning and thriving, we have a mental health crisis. Um, 42%, if you want to use that figure, of young people, these are high schoolers, say that they've had a period of at least 2 weeks where they were really concerned about their mental health when they were feeling so anxious and worried that they couldn't participate in their normal regular activities. That's a signal of, that isn't guaranteed to be a mental health problem, but that's a sign that there could be mental health problems. Those sorts of statistics, emergency room visits, those sorts of things have gone up. If you look at the report card of this country, you see that test scores have stagnated. Of course, we could talk about test scores and how I
Mhm.
feel about those, but um, on school engagement is very low. In our latest study, it was like only about a third of the kids who were really engaged in learning in school. Um, Rebecca Winthrop, who has looked at school engagement, found that only 4% of middle schoolers and high schoolers were in activities where they felt that they were really engaged in learning on a regular basis. So, we have high absenteeism. We could catalog the problems. The school superintendent organization, AASA, has realized that more of the same isn't going to is going to get us more of the same. Basically, isn't that the definition of ridiculousness? And they know that we need a change, so they're trying to incorporate what we've learned from brain science and from the science of learning and development into curriculum. So we're trying to change those sorts of things, and that's why we've launched the Real Skills for Real Life training for adults, which we're going to take nationwide. And they've made one of the core of 5 principles for transforming public education. So I have hope.
Yeah, but I want to say that I think when we started out in our careers, that we were curious about a lot of things that we did not know, which is why I think you started with these whole series of questions. And so I would somewhat characterize the field when we began as we kind of believed or were curious about more than we knew. But I think that has completely switched now because now we seem to be in an era where we know more than we're actually doing. And so,
It's a great
right,
way to
so I
say.
think it's
That's a quotable quote, Laura.
there you go. So so we've kind of gone in our lifetime from, believing more than we knew to knowing more than we do. And so I don't know what to say about that. It's really concerning the level of school engagement and statistics that you have put forth. Why is it that we don't use the knowledge that we have?
Well, I mean, I think there are a lot of things that run against us, but that doesn't mean that I don't think they could change. And I hope people who are listening to the call, I mean, I know a number of you who are signed up, and I know how smart you are, so join our conversation on the chat, please. Um, the No Child Left Behind Act, the focus on accountability, the focus on teaching to the test, the focus on in bringing what people thought worked with older kids. It didn't necessarily work, but bringing what people thought worked with older kids down to younger kids, so that kindergarten may look like what first or second grade looked like, and maybe that wasn't wonderful either. So I think that they're just the publishing companies control education, so it's hard to change because there's state standards that say what we should do. But I think there's a push for, but it isn't working. So there is periods of disruption are their possibilities of change. And again, I don't think that we would have the interest in the school superintendent organization and in the places where I'm piloting it. I mean, it's I'm working with whole districts, and I'm working with early childhood groups. I'm working with the Connecticut AEYC group, for example, as one pilot. I don't think we'd have interest in this if we weren't if there wasn't an openness to change, and in our national organizations, which I think will support us in making these changes.
Yeah, I want to change the subject a little bit because somebody in the chat wants to know who was that favorite author that you referred to earlier.
Her name is Lois Lensky, and
Mhm.
she was a children's book author. She was the Maurice Sendak of her time. She was just the best-selling author for kids. And so the fact that she wrote me was like, oh my gosh, you know, it was like a
Mhm.
Beatle writing you or something, like whoever your favorite rock star is writing you. I was like, I can't believe that she actually wrote me.
Mhm.
She did.
So let's turn to this question of work-life integration. So I remember when you first started the organization, and the issues around work-life and how it interacts with young children, how it interacts with families. What have you seen that has changed, and maybe what has not changed in the whole question of work-life integration with
Well,
family?
and I'm glad you say integration versus balance, because balance implies that it's
Mm.
50-50, and for you and me, it might be, different.
At
And it's
different
different.
times.
Yeah, and it's different every day.
Mhm.
Yesterday, my son was here. I could not even talk to him. I was in such a deadline, you know. And he doesn't live here, so I mean, he lives nearby, but he doesn't live in my house, so it's not like I could see him as soon as I got over my deadline. I think I'm just coming off of being the president of the Work and Family Researchers Network. So I've actually, even though I'm doing less research myself on work life and more on children and adolescents, I'm still very up on it. I'm about to go to their national conference in Montreal, their international conference in Montreal next week. Or week after next. Anyway, I think we have a vocabulary. I think we don't think it's a personal problem anymore. I, I, I hope that we don't think it's just going to be public policy. Public policy has been very slow, so
Mhm.
we were I think pretty instrumental in we were definitely instrumental in President Bill Clinton's um, wanting to sign the Family and Medical Leave Act, which gave paid parental leave to some employees under some
Mhm.
conditions for some of the time, not very long, unpaid, and so forth. But it was more than we had. But he did it because we did a study that showed that it didn't. What we did was we had 4 states that had passed parental leave legislation, and they differed on the policy dimensions. So we were trying to figure out which policy dimensions mattered. So we asked people who had most opposed the law locally and the people who had most supported the law locally. I don't think you could do this nationally, and maybe you couldn't do it locally anymore. We asked them what they wanted to know now that this was a state law before we had a federal law. And we had business cooperating with us too to look at what happened to productivity after these state laws were passed. And what we found, which I think was pretty persuasive to then President Clinton, was that it didn't destroy business, because the people who were opposed it were going to say the business community will, no one will be there when they're not working. So that said, public policy has been very slow. business policy was much faster, and we tracked that for 30 years. We did regular national ongoing studies. What I hope people know is that you can have a policy, but it depends on the people. So just like in
Hmm.
early childhood, it's all about relationships. You could have a parental leave policy in your company, or you could be, and if your boss thinks that successful people can't take it, you're going to behave differently than if your boss thinks that successful people can take it. So there's a culture that's really important in addition to having policies. When work works, and it's broader than just having work family, it's just like with kids, it's having a perspective of the employee as a whole person versus just the worker person. If you understand that the employee is a whole person and they're treated with respect and they have some say over their work and they're listened to and the things that matter in early childhood, then you're going to be much more productive and healthier and likely to stay at your company. So I've been working with nonprofits and teachers organizations to help build what we would call meeting basic psychological needs into workplaces because we found we called it an effective workplace. And we worked with thousands of companies when we partnered with SHRM to make this happen. We had an effective workplace index. We found that it really did improve work and family. So you need to take a holistic perspective, and that's what I'm working with now with nonprofits and teacher organizations versus the private sector employers that I worked with for decades.
Yeah, the policy has been very slow in the area, and there still seems to be such a gap between how we handle this matter and other European nations, for example, who have a very different perspective on this kind of thing.
We do. We do. Yes, Strawberry Girl. Woo!
Yes,
Yes,
that
Strawberry.
was it. There are a
That
lot of
I'm
questions that
responsible for that book. Thank you, Crystal.
A lot of questions in the chat. For people who are listening live, I really want to encourage you to join the after party and you can talk with Ellen yourself and make sure that your questions are answered. I know you used to work with Mr. Rogers.
I
Tell me
did.
about that.
Oh, that was such a shock. So I'm, there at Bank Street, a teacher now starting to do research. I was in the process of, had I published? I'm not sure. Written the book on exemplary childcare. So I was starting to get known in childcare beyond just the community where I worked. And I was writing a book on how parents grow and change the 6 stages of parenthood. And the Mr. Rogers team picked me as one of the people to interview to be a parent expert with him on television. So you get a call saying Mr. Rogers is like, it's like, what? What just happened to me? I couldn't believe it. And so then I got interviewed for 3 hours by Margaret McFarland. And anyone who knows Fred Rogers knows Margaret McFarland. He worked very closely with a child psychiatrist named Margaret McFarland. So every word he said, every the way he designed his programs was very designed with children's development in mind. And I thought, I know what I know. I'm not worried about this call, whatever. I took it like I was terrified about it because I really once it was a possibility, I wanted it, but I also didn't know that I should be really so terrified. I have never been through such an interview in my whole life. I mean, she asked me questions that people in the audience might have asked that were really, really tough. And you don't know, it was just I got off the 3 hour interview with her and I went, oh, I really don't expect to get this, but I did, which was a total shock. And then I was on my way to Pittsburgh to meet Fred for the first time and to be a parent expert on his show. So people always ask, what was he really like? If you saw him on television, you saw him in real life. He was exactly the same. He was, the thing that you might not know, though, is he's extremely funny. He had a wonderful sense of humor. He and his wife, Joanne, were a riot to listen to. I love the people he worked with. There has never been a workplace team that I've ever seen where people really like their bosses so much. Not that he didn't give them trouble, not that he wasn't impatient, he was, but he did little things like he always used we, he never used I. And he just was so authentic. He was just so who he was. And he also had such he was a Presbyterian minister, and television was his ministry. That was his congregation, so to
Hmm.
speak. That's how he practiced his religion. And he and the sense of calling, the sense of this is so important, made him braver. If you've ever watched the interview with him with Senator Pastore, where he had to defend PBS and he actually got the money, which the federal government was about to cut. Now they did, but then they didn't. Um, Fred actually defended it, but he helped Senator Pastore realize what it felt like to be a child. If you listen to that interview, it's just really, it'll give you goosebumps. It's just was wonderful. He became then a very good friend, and every time as I told you, I'm from West Virginia, so to get to West Virginia from New York is not easy. You had to fly to somewhere else to then fly to West Virginia. So I'd always go to Pittsburgh, go early in the morning, check my bag all the way through, take a taxi, run to now an Uber, but run
Hmm.
to see Fred and his team, spend a couple of hours with him, run back to the airport, and go home to see my mother. So it was, I kept in touch with him. He asked me to help him. I was one of two people he asked to help him figure out his legacy, which was a mega huge honor. I mean, it was an honor to be on his show. It was an honor to be his friend, and it was a huge honor to help him try to figure out what his legacy would be.
Yeah, quite a legacy. You have quite a legacy too. And, as we thought about all the different stages of your career adventure, you know, it's been so successful, but I know there has had to be some tough spots. And especially as in the era that you've worked, a lot of the policy has gone up and down, a lot of the context has changed dramatically. How have you handled it in these difficult times? Can you give us an example? And then, many of our listeners are facing difficult times right now. So maybe you can give us some wisdom about how to handle difficult times and how to make it through.
Well, I'm going to do it in two ways. I'm first going to just talk about. I've always been a little ahead of the curve, meaning that just because, and it's not because I'm super smart, it's because I'm a good listener. So if I could hear parents talking about feeling that they're the only ones, then I know that that's a public problem and that there should be study, there should be action. But there were no funders for work and family life. So try to start an organization and do
Hmm.
research when there are no funders. When I started listening to children and wanted to do a study about how kids feel about their parents' work and about how they feel about other issues growing up. There was no funding. Literally, I had that insight in 1985. The first study that I did was with people at Merck, where I went into their homes and I talked to the spouse and I talked to the employee and I talked to their kids, and I could see that the realities were like, whoa, the
Hmm.
spouse would think this, the employee would think this, the kids would think that, and it was like, whoo, we're in separate worlds here. And it took me until 1999, so you can do the math, 14 years, to get someone to believe in me that there should be a study on how kids see the world. You know, I just
Hmm.
kept, and when I told you about the parental leave study, um, I knew that states were passing policy. I knew that federal policy kept getting vetoed. I knew, I knew that it should be a study that brought the opponents and the supporters together, um, because I do a form of research called civic science, and so I think very hard about how you do the study is as important as what you do. And civic science means listening, basically. It means including people from the get-go. So I'd talked to a lot of people about what would work in a study. I got told, no, I can't tell you how many times. And finally I was at a retreat with the person I thought was the best possible funder. And she said, randomly, I'm going to take a walk at 6 o'clock. I've been asking their foundation for months and they've been saying no. And she said, I'm going to take a walk at 6 o'clock. I'll go. So I went for the walk at 6 o'clock and we got funded. So basically, the philosophy is if you totally believe it, you have to be patient. You have to understand that it's you might not make progress, but that if you really believe it and keep changing it in response to what people say, just keep going and not doing it. So fast forward, and you asked me about possibility mindset. Um, I think that it was the possibility mindset is a new discovery that we had when I was doing the book, The Breakthrough Years. And what a possibility mindset is it's the way I got to it. Let me just tell you how I got to it, which is again asking questions in between doing a nationally representative study of kids or youth from in this case 9 to 18. Then I had then the pandemic happened and I had this sample of kids and parents, this a representative sample, and I wanted to know how parents handle hard times with kids. So I pulled a sample of about 60 parents and their kids who I didn't know. They were, completely, I got phone numbers texted to me from by the research firm, which was Ipsos. And I asked the parents to tell me about a time when they lost it with their kids and what they did to how they handled it, basically, and just walk me through it step by step by step by step. I'm really curious, and so they did, and I began to hear three themes, and so in response to how do you deal when times are tough, I would say possibility mindset now, but I wouldn't have said it before till I listened to parents. So there were three things going on. The first was a growth mindset, and we all know that. I think growth mindset is Carol Dweck's wonderful research has become pretty omnipresent. We know that if we believe that things can't change versus we believe that things can't change, that our mindset affects our behavior. And I heard a growth mindset. I heard the people who were handling things who felt that they recovered from a real, horrible situation with their kids where they had lost it with their kids, had not been the parent that they wanted to be, um, believed that change was possible. But the second thing was really different, which is that they believed that they should face the hard feelings. Now, other studies by Jeremy Jameson and others, I didn't know these studies when I discovered this, but now I've found them, have found that most people want to avoid stress. Take a deep breath, get mindful, get over it, hope it goes away, versus really feeling what it feels to be in a bad situation. But not in a vindictive and gotcha way, but to really, if you're feeling stressful, to understand that that helps you perform. If you're feeling sad or angry or something, thinking about why, and then second, another part that's important about that is what can I do about it? And so I call that a possibility mindset. It has three parts. Things can change or not. You lean into the stress or the negative feelings. You feel them, but in a way that is a discovery way, like what can I do to handle it? And the third thing is you have self-efficacy. This would be Albert Bandura's research, but you feel like there's something that you can do to handle this. And that those three things go together into what is a possibility mindset. So and then I met with lots of people like, what do we call this thing?
Mm-hmm.
And other people say, gave me the name possibility mindset. Wasn't, that came from just talking to a lot of people. I had different names for it in the beginning. But I think it's seeing the possibilities when something is bad, when something is awful, when something's not working, and then finding support. We've developed a process now at Families and Work Institute that we're training people with in our modules where you don't try to do this by yourself. You find support. We've mostly seen growth as like an individual sport, but most sports are team sports. So we need a
Mm-hmm.
team to help us. And so again, in my conversation with the folks from Savannah, where they're wanting to make changes in their centers and in their programs, and these programs are with homeless people and people who really are having a hard time, and funding is a problem, and all the things that are going on in our field. But they're picking challenges that they want to address, and then they're addressing them together. They're using the possibility mindset process to do that, and that's totally cool. And we've worked
Mm-hmm.
with the workplaces across the state of Nevada where we taught them possibilities mindset, and could see that it improved health and improved retention, those sorts of things. So I think we're onto something. We're just at the beginning. We find it's more powerful than a growth mindset, but that's because it includes a growth mindset.
Uh-huh.
It builds on it. It's not competing, it builds on it. So, so that's how I would stay hopeful now that I have just helped to discover this possibility mindset. I think it really does help us when times are hard.
How can you apply that to early childhood education? As you know, we've had significant progress in the policy area, and we've also had significant pushback in the policy area. There are a number of things happening right now to be concerned about, and we have problems that have been persistent forever. The low wages, the high turnover, a lot of things that really challenge the field, market failure. So, give us some hints about how to apply these kind of concepts to the persistent, ongoing, difficult to deal with challenges of early childhood education profession.
Well, I can tell you how we're doing it with the Real Skills for Real Life modules. We are asking people to pick a challenge that, things you'd complain about and whatever it is, and learning and thriving today. And we put mental health with academic health. So pick a challenge that you think is affecting your our field, and then we have them talking to interviewing adults, looking at the research about challenges, but also interviewing other adults and other kids in their community about what they see as challenges, and then we have them refine their challenges, and then they would pick a person to work with, and then they figure out what they can do that's doable. It might not be it might not be changing everything. We can't change low wages, all by ourselves in a program. But maybe there are ways, if you take on the issue of low wages, maybe there are ways that a program could figure out how to put more money to staff, if the teams work together. I don't mean just the director figuring it out. I mean, and you have to be able to take the perspective of the other people. You can't figure out something that wouldn't work for the director if the director can't think out of something that wouldn't work for the staff. But there may be efficiencies in scaling. You may partner with other people to have lower material costs so you can put more money to staff, whatever problem. If there's a lot of concern about kids and behavior, and we have a process that we call share solutions, which I think works really well in handling kids' challenging, whatever we want to call it, behavior, which is solving problems together. I can describe that if you want, but so I just would,
Reducing adult control.
yeah, it's autonomy support is what
Yeah.
it is. Yeah,
Hmm.
it is. It's autonomy support. And Hannah, yes, Hannah is on this call, and she tried it with her kid and media, and maybe in the after hours she'll Hannah, you're teaching it to people too? Oh, cool. So maybe she'll join the after call and tell people how it works, and it won't be just for me.
That would be good to hear. So do join if you can. I want to move on, in our limited time, but we could be talking together for such a long time. But I know that you've come out with this breakthrough publication about teenagers. Perhaps many of us go into working with young children because teenagers seem a little scary. And you are working to help change the whole mindset about teens. Tell us about that.
Well, I told you that I do a kind of research called civic science,
Hmm.
which means that, I didn't really, I'm an early childhood person. I'm a work family person, but I didn't know adolescent development. really didn't. I'd done studies of how kids feel about the issues that they face growing up, but I didn't know who the researchers were. First I read, that's me. I read a lot. And if I pick someone whom I think is interesting, I go online and I listen to their speeches, so I don't always just sit there and read academic papers. I'll go find when they gave a lecture and listen to it because I learn better that way. And so I read a lot, and then I interviewed, it was 38 14 to 18-year-olds, and I asked them, what do they want to know about their own development? They were from different parts of the country. In fact, some were from different parts of the world. And I asked them, I'm going to interview researchers for this because I had a book contract for this book I'm going to write. What should I be asking them? And they said pretty uniformly, why do people hate teenagers? Now,
Hmm.
there is not a lot of research on why people hate teenagers. Let me tell you, I could find 3 or 4 studies about conceptions of adolescence. Not a lot of people had studied it. But our conceptions of adolescence, how we see people is how we act toward them. And so that this was the number one issue. And when I ask a question, if you, what was the question? But it wasn't the one wish question. It was the question of what should people know? What should adults know about people your age? And it was don't stereotype us, don't label us, don't call us the anxious generation. Well, that book hadn't come out yet, but they would just hate that. Don't just say we're all addicted to media. Don't, some of us are, yes, there's real problems, but not all of us are. So don't make these generalizations. Don't label us. Don't think ill of us. And just so, yeah. So let's just start with the way we see teenagers and the way we treat them is the way they're going to act toward us. And then I found that. I mean, I found that parents who see, I asked parents in the study that I did, the nationally representative study, if you had one word for the teenage brain, what would that word be? And 59% of parents use negative words. And then I could look at things like I could look at the grades from I had the kids and the parents from the same families. So I could look at all kinds of things and I could find if you controlled for everything, the way the parents saw their kids did also affect how the kids were doing. So even if you control, and other studies that have been more behavioral have found that too. So it's the same way. If we don't like someone, we don't, think the worst of them. Then I also tried to and the word that we use most often is immature. That was used by, I think, 18% of people, just that word or a word that means immature. 11% use that actual word. And so if we see, so you wouldn't say that a toddler behaving like a toddler is an immature preschooler. And I was like, why are we calling them immature? Why do we think they should be adults? They are, this is a transition phase, and they are primed to explore. Think of the baby bird leading the nest and the courage that it takes to lead the nest. It's developmentally necessary for them to move out into the world, and we need to understand that and give them opportunities for positive risks. And if we understand what they're developmentally primed to do, and we see their possibilities using the language that I came to, rather than just what's wrong with them, we're going to have better, and we treat them with giving them some autonomy because they know that they need to go out into the world and figure things out for themselves. Still, we're the boss, but they need some autonomy. They need to try out things on their own, and we need to figure out how to do that in a safe way. Then we don't have as much conflict as is perceived as normal with teenagers.
Now, one of the things that I read in your book that I really resonate with, because it's something that even 40 years ago that I had saw in children, even young children, as well as older children, is that this desire to be of service, to contribute in some way. And I wonder, you talk about it in your book as kids want to be helpers. I think about it as kids want to be contributors. And I think of so many ways that as parents and as a society, we don't allow children to be contributors. We allow them to be served, you know. Tell me a little bit about your
Oh,
thinking
I
on that.
love that you say that. I call that a basic psychological need, contributing. And lots of people have found that. Oh, I don't know. There's research on it, but let me just say that I talked to kids who were really having mental health challenges in the book, and the ones who seem to be doing better after they'd gotten over something acute. So I'm not saying this is necessarily when they were in an acute stage of a real mental health crisis. If they could then become helpers of other kids who were having mental health struggles, they were doing really pretty well. So that led me to the whole notion of the helpers. And for if we feel that we have it's connected to the purpose research. It's like purpose with a small p. if we're feeling that we're making life better for someone else, this is Bill Damon's research, a lot of people's research, Andrew Fellini, other people. But if we feel that we're making life better for someone else, not just us, we're in the best, we do better in life. We're better, again, in school, we're better in life, we're better in success. It's a need that we all have. It's the same as the need to connect with other people. If we feel that if we're connected and doing something beyond the self, this is the way that Bill Damon would call it, um, life is so much better.
Yeah, one of the things that I see in your whole journey of your career is that whether it was early childhood, whether it was work family integration, and now your work with adolescents, your work all has a theme of, I think, what's called going to the source, working with people, finding out from people themselves. Finally, do you want to make a few comments about that?
Well, I went to Vassar College, and that was if you wanted to get an A, they called it going to the source. Um, and um, and so, yeah, don't make assumptions about other people. Go to the source. So if you were studying kids, you talk to kids. I mean, I did a study when I was a senior in college because I was interested in adolescent and obviously personally interested in conflict from the perspective of parents and kids. You can see that now years later. I'm still interested in that. And I looked at fights for that. And so you come up with different things than what people typically find. I didn't know the name for it then. It's called civic science now. And Phil Zalazzo, who's from the University of Minnesota, and I just held a conference in Canada last week for 3, 4 days, where we looked at some of the most successful research in this country and people who do the best research um, or who create the best programs from kids use civic science, which means that you don't see the other people as your subjects of a, if you're in a study, they're not your subjects. They're your co-creators. They're your participants. If you're going to write a book, you try it out with people, and then you improve it. That's something that Adam Grant told me that he always does. So it's Velma McBride Murray, who has created the best intervention for adolescents that I've practically ever seen, co-created her interventions with kids and with the parents in her community and with the ministers and in the community, with the other people who
Mhm.
were the gatekeepers. So yeah, going to the source was a thing that got you an A at Vassar, but it's gotten me an A plus in life.
Definitely an A plus in life. So I want to encourage everyone I know there's so many questions and comments in the chat that we haven't had a chance to come to. So I want to encourage people to join the after party. Click the link in the chat if you want to talk with Ellen live and get some of the questions answered. So many questions that are in the chat. So do join us at the after party. And then I want to also encourage all of you to join us next month where we're going to talk with Elliot Haspel and hear about some of his groundbreaking work that he's doing in family policy. And also, finally, I want to thank all of you for once again joining the Kale Catalyst. This was our 60th episode. Thanks to you, we're always interested in hearing what successful leaders in our field have done, how they did it, and how they've overcome. Thank you so much, Ellen, for sharing your time with us today. And it has been a joy to speak with you. And I'll see you at the after party.
Thank you for being an incredible interviewer and conversationalist.
Good night, everybody.
Bye bye.